The Rolls-Royce Phantom glided to a halt beneath the luminous canopy of the Boston Harbor Hotel, its midnight paint reflecting the amber glow of hanging crystal chandeliers. June twilight bathed the cobblestone drive in honeyed light, and the doorman, white-gloved, immaculate, stepped forward with practiced deference before the rear door even began to open. Nathaniel James Blackwood emerged into the warmth of early summer, the scent of harbor salt mixing with expensive perfume drifting from the lobby. His Tom Ford tuxedo, midnight navy and cut with surgical precision, caught the light as he straightened. The Patek Philippe Grand Complications on his wrist, $250,000 of Swiss engineering, glinted as he adjusted his cuffs. John Lobb Oxford's $4,000 of hand-stitched leather touched pavement with barely a whisper. Behind him, Garrett Wells unfolded from the Phantom's interior, 6 feet of former Navy SEAL discipline wrapped in a Keton suit that cost more than most men earned in 3 months. His earpiece was nearly invisible, his expression professionally neutral, his presence a wall of understated protection. The doorman's eyes widened fractionally. Recognition flickered, was suppressed, returned as certainty. "Good evening, Mr. Blackwood. Welcome." Nathaniel offered the faintest nod, nothing more. Words were unnecessary when your net worth spoke in billions. Above them, through floor-to-ceiling windows on the hotel's 3rd floor, 300 guests celebrated what they believed was the triumph of Victoria Catherine Ashford's career. Champagne fountains, string orchestra, ice sculptures spelling her company's name in crystalline letters. The press had been invited, cameras rolling live for Bloomberg and TechCrunch, capturing every moment of what was supposed to be her coronation. She had no idea the man she'd divorced 18 months ago, the man she'd dismissed as a $40,000 a year failure, was about to walk through those doors and unravel everything she thought she knew about success, about worth, about the biggest mistake of her life. Garrett's voice came low, meant only for Nathaniel. "Last chance to reconsider, boss." Nathaniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Somewhere above them, Victoria was laughing, radiant in a gown that cost more than the monthly rent on the Queen's apartment they'd once shared. Preston Carmichael's hand would be on the small of her back, possessive and proud, his fake Patek catching light and fooling everyone who didn't know how to spot a replica. 18 months, Nathaniel said quietly. 18 months she's had everything she thought she wanted. Tonight, she learns what she threw away. They moved toward the entrance. Inside, warmth and music spilled through the lobby. Nathaniel handed the invitation to the concierge, whose tablet confirmed what her widening eyes already suspected. "Mr. Nathaniel Blackwood, +1. The Victoria Suite awaits, sir. 3rd floor, East Wing." The elevator ride lasted 30 seconds. 30 seconds of silence broken only by the mechanical hum of cables and Garrett's steady breathing. Nathaniel studied his reflection in the polished brass doors. The man he'd hidden for 7 years, finally allowed to exist in the same room as the woman who'd called him worthless. The doors opened onto chaos masked as celebration. And then, like a record scratch in an old film, everything stopped. Heads turned. Whispers ignited like brush fire. Phones emerged from clutches and pockets, fingers flying across screens. Google searches launched with frantic urgency. Nathaniel Blackwood, Forbes 400, $4.5 billion. The hidden billionaire who'd been married to Victoria Ashford. The IT support worker who'd fixed her laptop while running a private equity empire worth $7 billion in assets under management. Across the ballroom, champagne flute halfway to her lips, Victoria Catherine Ashford turned toward the commotion. Their eyes met. The glass slipped from her fingers. "18 months earlier, On a January morning so cold the windows of the Queen's apartment had frosted into abstract art, the man Victoria knew as Nate Brooks woke to an alarm that cost $19 at Target. The studio apartment was everything a struggling IT worker could afford in New York City, which was to say, nearly nothing. 700 square feet, a radiator that clanked and hissed like a dying animal, water pressure that turned showers into apologetic trickles. The building superintendent was a Russian immigrant who spoke 3 words of English and fixed precisely nothing. Nathaniel, though here, in this life, he was only Nate, rolled out of bed and began the transformation he'd perfected over 7 years of deliberate invisibility. Levi's jeans, $35 at Macy's, already fading at the knees. Old Navy polo in corporate navy blue, $18 on clearance. Nike sneakers he'd resold twice because Nate Brooks couldn't afford replacements. The Timex Ironman watch that kept perfect time despite costing less than a decent steak. The Honda Accord waiting in the street, dated to 2007, its odometer creeping past 238,000 miles. The paint had oxidized to a mottled grey blue. One hubcap was missing, and the passenger side mirror was held on with duct tape and prayer. He drove through pre-dawn darkness toward Ashford Industries, the family empire where Victoria's father ruled with aristocratic certainty, and where Nate Brooks occupied a cubicle in the basement IT department, invisible and unremarkable. The badge scanner beeped. Green light. Access granted to the man nobody noticed. Jacob Reed, 28 and convinced he'd found his ceiling, looked up from a desktop he was re-imaging. "Morning, Nate. You catch the game last night?" "Caught the highlights." "Brutal loss. Hey, you see they posted the senior tech opening? 68,000 base. You should apply, man. You've been level 2 for what, 3 years?" Nathaniel smiled the smile of a man comfortable with his station. "I'm good where I am, Jacob. Less stress. More time for what matters." What mattered, of course, was the test. The 7-year experiment in human nature that had begun with a widow's grief and a toddler's tears, and which was now approaching its inevitable conclusion. At 6 in the evening, Nathaniel clocked out, nodded to the security guard who never learned his name, and drove the Honda 4 blocks to a private garage that didn't appear on any map. The attendant, paid handsomely for discretion, waved him through to the VIP level, where the real vehicle waited. The Bentley Mulsanne gleamed under LED lights, $340,000 of British engineering and hand-stitched leather. Nathaniel changed in the garage's private bathroom, trading Old Navy for Kiton, Timex for Vacheron Constantin. The transformation took 7 minutes. When he emerged, Nate Brooks had vanished entirely. The penthouse occupied the 45th floor of a Tribeca tower that catered exclusively to those who measured wealth in 9 figures or more. 5,000 square feet, walls of glass overlooking the Hudson River, art that museums coveted. The Warhol alone was worth $15 million. Furniture custom-made in Italy, shipped in containers, assembled by craftsmen who signed non-disclosure agreements. Ruby Blackwood, 13 years old and brilliant in the way her mother had been brilliant before greed corroded everything good in her, looked up from AP physics homework that would have challenged most college sophomores. "Dad?" She launched herself into his arms with the unself-conscious joy of a child who'd lost one parent and refused to take the other for granted. "How was school, sweetheart?" "We started quantum entanglement today. Mr. Peterson says I should skip ahead to the university course, but I told him I want to master the fundamentals first. You always say shortcuts create weak foundations." Nathaniel felt something warm and fierce expand in his chest. This child, this miracle who'd survived her mother's narcissism and a helicopter crash that had orphaned her at 3, was the only purely good thing in his life. "That's my girl. Homework finished?" Every problem. Want to check my work? He did. Not because he doubted her. Ruby hadn't made a careless error since she was 8. But because these moments of normalcy, of father-daughter simplicity, were the antidote to the poison of the double life he'd chosen. Later, after Ruby was asleep and the penthouse had settled into the particular silence of expensive real estate, Garrett appeared with the day's briefing. Atlanta acquisition closed. $285 million wired. Chicago expansion approved by the board. Dallas negotiations entering final stage. Nathaniel nodded, only half listening. His mind was elsewhere, circling the woman he'd married 7 years ago in a courthouse ceremony that had scandalized her family and confused his friends. Also, Garrett continued, his tone shifting to something more careful. Preston Carmichael has increased contact frequency with Mrs. Blackwood. Lunch yesterday, coffee this morning, dinner planned for Friday. The words landed like stones in still water, ripples spreading outward. Let it play out. Garrett's jaw tightened fractionally. 7 years together had taught him when to push and when to remain silent. This was a silence moment, but he couldn't help himself. Boss, I'm allowing her to choose. That's the entire point, Garrett. If I intervene, I'll never know, and I need to know. After Isabel, after everything, I need to know if love without money exists, or if I've been chasing a fairy tale my entire adult life. The name, Isabel, hung in the air between them, a ghost neither man wanted to summon, but both knew would never fully rest. Isabel Sinclair, who'd married Nathaniel when he was 24 and building his first startup, who'd smiled through lean years when the company teetered on bankruptcy, who'd whispered promises of forever in the darkness of their too-small apartment. Isabel, who'd begun an affair with an oil tycoon the moment Nathaniel's company showed signs of failure, who'd planned to leave him for a man worth 10 times his struggling net worth, who'd died in a helicopter crash en route to her lover's ranch in Texas. The investigators had been thorough. The affair had been ongoing for 8 months. Ruby had been 3 years old, oblivious to her mother's duplicity, unaware that she was being traded like stock in a company with declining prospects. Nathaniel had made 2 promises at Isabel's funeral. First, Ruby would never know her mother had been leaving them. Second, he would never again allow anyone to love him for his money rather than his character. The first promise he'd kept without exception. The second had cost him 7 years of his life and a marriage that was now dying by degrees, suffocated under the weight of Victoria's shame and her family's contempt. Protocol revelation, Nathaniel said quietly. Review the timeline. Make sure everything's in place for June. Garrett pulled up files on his tablet, scanning details both men had memorized months ago. June 6, 2024, Ashford Digital IPO celebration, Boston Harbor Hotel. 300 guests, including press. Mrs. Blackwood will be at peak visibility, maximum confidence. The reveal will be complete, Nathaniel finished. Public, undeniable, and permanent. 7 years ago, on a February afternoon, when sleet turned Manhattan streets into skating rinks, and the Starbucks near Ashford Industries smelled of wet wool and overpriced lattes, Nathaniel had been sitting with a laptop and a problem that refused elegant solutions. The iPad had clattered to the floor 6 inches from his foot, spraying caramel macchiato across tiles that had seen worse. The woman who dropped it was 25, frazzled in the way of young professionals juggling too many responsibilities, and beautiful in a way that didn't rely on the designer labels her family's money could have easily purchased, but which she'd refused out of some admirable, stubborn pride. Oh God, oh no, I'm so sorry. Nathaniel had already retrieved the iPad, was already checking for cracks with the automatic competence of someone who'd spent years in technical support. Screen's fine. Case took the impact. You're lucky. She'd looked at him then, really looked, and something had sparked in the air between them. Not love at first sight. Nathaniel didn't believe in fairy tales anymore. But recognition. Two people who'd chosen modest lives in a city that worshipped excess, who carried themselves with quiet dignity in a culture of loudness. You work in tech? IT support. Fixing broken things is kind of my specialty. Her smile had been genuine, uncalculated. She'd extended her hand. Victoria Ashford. I just started in marketing at my dad's company. Still learning where everything is, obviously. The irony hadn't escaped him. She was an Ashford, the Ashfords, whose name appeared on buildings and charity galas and society pages. And yet here she was, working instead of living off trust funds, buying her own coffee instead of having assistants handle such pedestrian tasks. Maybe, he'd thought, maybe this one would be different. 6 months of dating had reinforced that hope. Victoria had loved their cheap dinners at Olive Garden, had laughed through bargain movie nights, had fallen asleep on his shoulder during subway rides home from free concerts in Central Park. She'd never asked about money, never complained about his modest salary, never once suggested he should want more than he had. The December courthouse wedding had been her idea. I don't need a big ceremony, Nate. I just need you. Her family's reaction had been less enthusiastic. Harrison Ashford, CEO of a manufacturing empire worth $900 million, had looked at Nathaniel the way one might regard a particularly disappointing stock investment. My daughter is marrying an IT support worker who makes $54,000 a year? Constance Ashford had been more direct. Victoria, darling, you can do so much better. Preston Carmichael has been asking about you, and he's a vice president at Morgan Stanley. I love Nate, Mother. The conversation is over. But it hadn't been over. Not remotely. The first Thanksgiving dinner at the Ashford estate in Connecticut had set the template for 7 years of slow poison. The dining room alone was larger than the apartment Nathaniel and Victoria shared. Oil paintings of stern ancestors watched from walls paneled in imported mahogany. Crystal glittered under chandelier light, and the silverware carried the weight of generations. Harrison had carved the turkey with the precision of a man who controlled every detail of his environment. So, Nate, still fixing computers, I take it? Yes, sir. Honest work. Preston Carmichael, invited as a family friend despite his obvious interest in Victoria, had offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Respectable, absolutely. Not everyone needs to be ambitious. Society requires people at all levels, right? Constance had sighed, as though personally wounded. The Harrington girl just married a neurosurgeon. They bought in Greenwich. $3.5 million. Such a lovely property. Victoria's aunt, Vivian Ashford, 60 years old and bitter from 3 divorces to progressively wealthier men, had leaned forward with predatory interest. You two still rent in Queens, don't you? We're comfortable there. Harrison's knife had paused mid-cut. Comfortable? A 30-year-old man using the word comfortable about a rental apartment. The drive home had been quiet until Victoria finally spoke, her voice carrying an edge Nathaniel had never heard before. Could you not say you're comfortable anymore? It sounds unambitious. His hands had tightened on the steering wheel. What should I say instead? That you're working toward advancement. That you have goals. Don't make it sound like you're settling. But I am comfortable, Victoria. We have enough. We have each other. What else matters? You're 30, Nate. 2 words, delivered with a weariness that suggested this conversation had been building for months, rehearsed in her mind during family dinners and lunches with friends whose husbands earned multiples of his salary. The seed had been planted. Over the next 4 years, it would grow into something that choked out everything good between them. Christmas 2019 arrived with the kind of snow that made Manhattan look like a postcard and hid the grime beneath pristine white. The Ashford Holiday Gala was black tie, which meant Nathaniel wore his best suit, a J.C. Penney special purchased on sale for $280, while everyone else wore Italian designers whose names he recognized only from Forbes articles. Preston Carmichael had been promoted to senior vice president, a fact he mentioned within 3 minutes of greeting Nathaniel. Still at Ashford IT? Man, they really should promote you. How long have you been level 2 now? 3 years. Tough break. I just made SVP. 520,000 base, plus equity. Not bad for 37, right? The shoulder pat that followed was both congratulatory and condescending, the physical manifestation of pity disguised as friendship. Visitian had materialized beside Victoria like smoke, her voice pitched to Carrie. Look at Preston, darling. That's what success looks like. Confidence, achievement, a real man who provides. Victoria had said nothing, had not defended Nathaniel, had not pushed back against the implication that her husband was something less than real, less than a provider, less than enough. The silence had been louder than words. In the car afterward, as snow accumulated on windshields and the city's Christmas lights blurred through frosted glass, Victoria had broken. Do you realize what it's like? Everyone comparing us? Preston made SVP. Lindsay's husband is a partner at Sullivan Cromwell. Sutton's dating a hedge fund manager. And you're still level 2 IT. I have a job. I work hard. I thought that mattered. It's not enough. Don't you understand? I'm 31 years old, Nate. I want a life. Travel. Nice things. A house. Children in good schools. What can you give me? This Honda? This rental apartment? A future of just barely getting by? The accusation had hung between them, impossible to defend against because she wasn't wrong. Nate Brooks couldn't give her those things. But Nathaniel Blackwood could have given her everything she'd ever dreamed of, and more besides. The test was whether she could love him without knowing that. She couldn't. Summer 2021 brought Victoria's promotion to VP of Marketing at Ashford Industries. Salary jumped from $102,000 to $195,000. And with it came a transformation Nathaniel watched with the detached fascination of a scientist observing an experiment reach its predicted conclusion. Designer handbags appeared. Chanel, Hermes. $400 spa treatments became weekly rituals. Her friend circle shifted toward Manhattan's elite. Women who lunched at restaurants where entrees cost what Nathaniel supposedly earned in a day. The dinner at Le Bernardin had been a turning point. Lindsay Pembroke, whose husband ran a successful litigation practice, had asked the question everyone was clearly thinking. Victoria, what does your husband do? The pause had been fractional, but Nathaniel had felt it from across the table where he sat, ignored, relegated to the conversational margins reserved for spouses who didn't merit inclusion. IT support. Oh, that's nice. Does he have plans to, advance his career? We're discussing options. Sutton Caldwell, whose fiancé had just sold a fintech startup for $65 million, had smiled with practiced sympathy. My James always says the tech sector has such potential. I'm sure Nate will find his opportunity. Victoria had come home angry, not at her friends for their transparent pity, but at Nathaniel for inspiring it. Do you know how humiliating that was? Telling them you fix computers for a living. Watching their faces when they realize my husband is nobody special. I'm special to you. Isn't that enough? Don't pull that sentimental garbage. You lack ambition, Nate. You're 32 years old, and you're satisfied with mediocrity. That's not noble. It's pathetic. The words had been designed to wound, and they'd succeeded. Not because they hurt Nathaniel's pride. He knew his worth, knew the empire he'd built, knew the billions that made her contempt absurd. But because they revealed a truth he'd been avoiding. Victoria had never loved him. She'd loved the idea of being different, of choosing substance over status, of being the woman who didn't need wealth to be happy. But when tested, when challenged by her family and her friends and her own insecurities, she'd failed spectacularly. Preston Carmichael had returned to Victoria's life in the fall of 2022 like a tumor metastasizing. Chance encounters at the coffee shop near Ashford Industries, spontaneous lunch invitations to discuss marketing strategy, text messages that arrived with increasing frequency, their tone shifting from professional to personal with calculated precision. Nathaniel had seen the messages, had watched the intimacy grow, had done nothing, because intervention would invalidate the test. If he warned her away from Preston, he'd never know if she'd have chosen loyalty over temptation. If he revealed his wealth, he'd never know if her love was genuine or transactional. The only way to know was to let her choose freely. She chose Preston. December brought the Ashford Industries holiday party, an event for senior staff only. Victoria had made clear that Nate Brooks didn't qualify, that his presence would be embarrassing, that he should stay home. He'd driven to the office anyway, parked in the shadows of the visitor lot, and watched through 8th-floor windows as the party unfolded. Victoria, in a black cocktail dress that probably cost $3,000, Preston's hand on the small of her back, possessive and familiar. Their heads tilted together in conversation that excluded everyone else. At 9:45, the crowd had thinned. Most guests had departed for after-parties and bars, leaving only the core group. Preston had led Victoria to a conference room with glass walls, had closed the door, but not the blinds. What happened next had been visible to anyone who cared to look. Preston's hand cupping Victoria's face, her eyes closing, the kiss that started gentle and deepened into something that couldn't be explained away as friendly or accidental. Victoria hadn't pushed him away, hadn't hesitated, hadn't broken the kiss until it reached its natural conclusion. Nathaniel had watched from the parking lot, his breath fogging the Honda's windows, and felt something crystallize inside his chest. Not heartbreak. He'd survived Isabel's betrayal and death. This was merely confirmation of what he'd already known. Not anger. Rage required surprise, and there was none. What he felt was clarity. The experiment had concluded. The data was irrefutable. Victoria Ashford, given a choice between modest love and ambitious status, would choose status every time. Protocol. Revelation could proceed as planned. 2 weeks later, on a January night when the apartment's radiator had finally surrendered entirely and their breath misted in the cold, Victoria had come home late smelling of expensive wine and Preston's cologne. "Nate, we need to talk." He'd been sitting on their second-hand couch, waiting. The divorce papers he'd known were coming sat in his peripheral vision like a predator waiting to pounce. About Preston? Her face had gone white, then red, cycling through shock and guilt and defensive anger in rapid succession. "You know?" I saw. The holiday party. Through the window. "Then you know this isn't working. We've grown apart, Nate. We want different things." "You want Preston because he's successful, because he has money, because he has ambition, because he's going somewhere. You've been level 2 IT for 5 years. 5 years of the same dead-end job while Preston advances and builds and achieves." Nathaniel had let the words wash over him, cataloguing each one for future reference. "So if I had money, you'd stay." "But you don't. That's the entire problem. You're never going to have money, Nate. You're going to be a $54,000 IT worker until you retire, if you're lucky. I can't live like that. I won't. The divorce papers had emerged from her purse like a weapon. I've been fair. You get $60,000 from our joint savings. You keep the Honda. I keep everything else. Sign it, and we can both move forward. Nathaniel had read the settlements slowly, noting how thoroughly she'd divided their modest assets. The furniture she'd purchased, the investment accounts funded by her family money, the life insurance policy that listed her as beneficiary. Nate Brooks was being dismissed with $60,000 and a car held together with prayer and duct tape. I don't want the $60,000. Her confusion had been almost comical. What? Keep it all. I want nothing. Nate, are you— $60,000 is a lot of money for someone like you. For someone like me, he'd repeated flatly. Yes, I'm aware of my station. Keep it, Victoria. Buy yourself something nice. Celebrate your upgrade. He'd signed the papers with a pen that cost 99 cents, his signature a scrawl of finality. Victoria had stared at him, something like guilt flickering across her features before being suppressed by relief and contempt in equal measure. At least you're being mature about this. Mature, he'd agreed. Sure. He'd walked out of the apartment for the last time, carrying nothing but his wallet and keys, leaving behind 7 years of marriage and the woman who'd never bothered to learn who he really was. In the Mercedes waiting 4 blocks away, Garrett had studied him with concerned eyes. Done? Done. She took everything. Thinks she's generous for offering me $60,000. She has no idea what she just gave up. No, Nathaniel had said quietly, pulling out his phone to access the Blackwood Capital secure server. But she will. June 6th, Boston Harbor Hotel, 300 witnesses. She wants her moment of triumph? She'll get it, along with the truth. Now, 18 months later, that moment had finally arrived. Nathaniel stood in the ballroom doorway, watching recognition ripple through the crowd like a stone thrown into still water. Phones emerged from pockets and clutches. Google searches launched. Wikipedia pages loaded. Nathaniel James Blackwood. Forbes 400, number 143. Net worth north of $4 billion. The hidden billionaire who'd worked IT support for 7 years while running an empire. The ex-husband, Victoria Ashford, had divorced for being insufficiently ambitious. Across the room, champagne flute shattered at her feet. Victoria's face had gone the color of old snow. Preston Carmichael stood beside her, his fake Patek catching light and fooling no one who knew what to look for. His hand falling away from Victoria's waist as the crowd's attention shifted away from her triumph and toward the man she'd discarded. Nathaniel began walking toward them, his footsteps measured and unhurried, the crowd parting before him like water around a stone. Every eye in the ballroom watched. Every camera captured the moment. And Victoria Catherine Ashford, CEO of a company worth $950 million, realized too late that she'd traded real for fake, substance for status. A man worth billions for a man drowning in debt while pretending it's success. The look on her face was worth every moment of the 7-year test. It was worth every dinner where her family had mocked him, every friend who'd pitied her for marrying beneath her station, every text message from Preston that had gone unanswered by Nathaniel's intervention. This moment, this perfect, devastating moment of realization, was exactly what Protocol Revelation had been designed to deliver. Garrett's voice came low in his ear, barely audible over the shocked whispers filling the ballroom. Boss, everyone's recording. This is going to be everywhere by morning. Nathaniel's smile was cold and precise, the smile of a man who'd planned this moment down to the smallest detail. Good, Let them record. Let them post. Let them share. Victoria wanted public success. She's about to get public truth instead. He stopped 3 feet from where she stood frozen, her mascara beginning to run, her breath coming in shallow gasps that might have been panic, or might have been the death of every assumption she'd made about the man she'd married and divorced. "Hello, Victoria," he said quietly, his voice carrying in the sudden silence. "Congratulations on your IPO. I told you I'd be here." Harrison Ashford recovered first, corporate instinct overriding shock. His voice boomed across the ballroom with forced joviality that couldn't quite mask the tremor underneath. "Nathaniel! Nathaniel Blackwood! What an unexpected pleasure. Had absolutely no idea you'd be attending tonight." The silence shattered into 1,000 whispered fragments. Phones glowed in the dimness like fireflies, screens filling with search results that rewrote everything 300 people thought they knew about the divorced IT worker who'd just walked into his ex-wife's celebration worth more than everyone in the room combined. Nathaniel extended his hand, the grip firm enough to remind Harrison who held power here. "Mr. Ashford, impressive work with the IPO. 950 million valuation. Your daughter should be proud." The words landed with surgical precision. Your daughter. Not my ex-wife, not Victoria. A deliberate distancing that established the terms of this encounter. Constance Ashford materialized beside her husband, diamonds at her throat catching light like trapped stars. Her face had gone carefully blank, the practiced neutrality of old money confronting a situation that defied protocol. "Nathaniel, we didn't realize. You worked in IT at our company. You drove that awful Honda." "You lived in Queens." The Honda comment drew titters from the crowd, quickly suppressed. Nathaniel's smile never reached his eyes. "I still own the Honda, Mrs. Ashford. It was my father's. He worked factory floors for 40 years before he died. That car reminds me where I came from. Something I'd never want to forget, unlike some people." The barb hung in the air, impossible to miss, directed at the woman who'd spent 7 years trying to forget her own modest beginnings before marrying into the Ashford fortune. Preston Carmichael stepped forward, jaw tight, hand falling protectively to Victoria's shoulder. The gesture was meant to establish territory, to show ownership, but Nathaniel noted how Victoria flinched slightly at the touch. "I'm Preston Carmichael, Victoria's fiancé, managing director at Goldman Sachs, yes. $680,000 salary. Congratulations on the recent promotion." Nathaniel's gaze dropped to Preston's wrist, lingered on the Patek Philippe that would have fooled amateurs. "Nice watch. The replica market has gotten remarkably good. From a distance, you can barely tell it's not genuine." Preston's face flushed crimson. Several guests near enough to hear gasped. Phones captured the moment, fingers already typing out messages that would be trending on social media before the champagne went flat. Victoria found her voice, though it came out thinner than she'd intended. "Nathaniel, I can't. How is this possible?" He turned to her fully for the first time, and she took an involuntary step backward. The man looking at her bore no resemblance to Nate Brooks. Same face, same bone structure, but everything else had transformed. The posture, the presence, the absolute certainty in his eyes. "You mean, how is it possible that the man you divorced for lacking ambition founded Blackwood Capital 9 years ago? Built it to $7 billion in assets under management, made Forbes 400 before I turned 33. Each question landed like a physical blow. "You lied to me." "I never lied. You never asked the right questions. You assumed that because I worked IT support and drove an old car, that was all I was. You measured me by appearances instead of character. I wanted to know if you could love me without knowing what I was worth." His voice dropped, meant only for her, though the room had gone so quiet that everyone strained to hear. Now we both know the answer. 18 months earlier, in the days following the divorce, Nathaniel had stopped pretending entirely. The morning after Victoria signed the papers, he'd walked into the Blackwood Capital headquarters on Fifth Avenue at 7 a.m., the building still quiet except for night security and the cleaning crew finishing their rounds. The 40th floor belonged entirely to his company, 240 employees, from junior analysts fresh out of Wharton to managing directors who'd left Goldman and Morgan Stanley for the opportunity to work with someone Forbes called the ghost investor for his pathological privacy. Lawrence Henderson, CFO, and the closest thing Nathaniel had to a friend besides Garrett, looked up from a Bloomberg terminal as Nathaniel entered the executive suite. "Morning. You look like you slept in your clothes." "Didn't sleep. Finalized the divorce last night." Lawrence's expression softened fractionally. He'd been there through Isabel's death, through the revelation of her affair, through the years of deliberate invisibility that had followed. He understood the test, even if he'd never agreed with the methodology. And she chose exactly as expected. Ambition over loyalty, status over substance, Preston Carmichael over me. Preston Carmichael is drowning in debt while pretending to be solvent. Our intelligence shows he's leveraged to the point of absurdity, which makes him perfect for Victoria's purposes. He looks successful. That's all she cared about in the end. Lawrence pulled up a financial profile on his screen, the kind of deep background research that only serious money could purchase. Preston's entire financial life laid bare in columns and graphs. $680,000 salary sounds impressive, until you see he's spending $890,000 annually. Penthouse mortgage he can't afford, car leases bleeding in dry, credit cards maxed. He's one missed bonus away from catastrophic failure. Nathaniel studied the numbers with detached interest. Let it play out. Victoria wanted to marry success. She's getting the illusion of it. That seems appropriate. The board meeting that morning had covered 3 acquisitions totaling $412 million. Nathaniel had approved 2, rejected 1, and authorized preliminary research on a 4th opportunity in the healthcare AI sector. By noon, he'd increased his net worth by an estimated $87 million through strategic exits from 2 portfolio companies. By 3 p.m., he was in jeans and a t-shirt in the penthouse kitchen, making grilled cheese sandwiches for Ruby while she explained the finer points of quantum superposition. So the particle exists in multiple states simultaneously until you observe it, at which point the wave function collapses and you get a definite state. But Dad, here's what I don't understand. She'd paused, studying his face with the uncomfortable perception of a child who'd learned too young to read adult emotions. "You're sad. It's about Miss Victoria, isn't it?" Nathaniel flipped the sandwich, watching cheese bubble at the edges. "The divorce finalized yesterday." "Good. She was mean to you. I heard her once, when she didn't know I was home. She called you dead weight on the phone to someone." The words hit harder than they should have. Ruby had been 10 when she'd overheard that conversation, had kept it secret for 3 years, out of some misguided desire to protect him. "I'm sorry you heard that, sweetheart." "I'm not. I needed to know who she really was. Just like you needed to know." Ruby accepted the sandwich, took a bite, swallowed before continuing. "Mum was like that too, wasn't she? Before she died. She wanted money more than she wanted us." The perception was too accurate to deny. "Your mother had challenges, issues with security and self-worth that manifested as materialism." "She was going to leave us for someone richer." "I know, Dad." "I've known since I was 11. I found the old investigator reports in your study when I was looking for printer paper." Nathaniel's chest constricted. He'd protected those files poorly, assuming a child wouldn't understand the legal terminology and financial forensics that had exposed Isabel's affair. You read them. Every page. I needed to understand why you were testing Ms. Victoria. Why you pretended to be Nate Brooks instead of telling her the truth. Ruby set down her sandwich, her 13-year-old face suddenly decades older. You were protecting yourself, making sure it wouldn't happen again. I get it, Dad. I just wish the answer had been different. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. The months that followed had settled into a new rhythm. Nathaniel stopped maintaining the Nate Brooks identity entirely, resigned from Ashford Industries via email that cited personal reasons, and focused his energy on the empire he'd built. Blackwood Capital closed 9 acquisitions between February and August, expanding into sectors ranging from renewable energy to artificial intelligence. The portfolio companies collectively employed 14,000 people across 18 states. Annual revenue approached $9 billion, none of which Victoria knew, because she'd blocked his number and moved on with a speed that would have been impressive if it hadn't been so predictable. The Instagram post had appeared 3 weeks after the divorce finalized. Victoria Ashford, smiling in a cocktail dress that probably cost $4,000, Preston's arm around her waist, both of them glowing with the particular smugness of people who believed they'd traded up. The caption read, "New chapters, new possibilities, finally with someone who matches my drive." The comments had been predictably supportive. Lindsay Pembroke, "So happy for you, babe. You deserve this." Sutton Caldwell, "Preston is amazing. What an upgrade." Vivian Ashford, "Finally, a real man for my niece." Garrett had shown Nathaniel the post with barely concealed disgust. "She's celebrating like she won something. Should we leak your identity? End this farce?" "No. Let her build higher. The fall will be more spectacular." By September, Victoria had been promoted to VP with expanded responsibilities and a salary bump to $220,000. The promotion had been her father's doing, a consolation prize for the unfortunate marriage that had finally ended. By October, Preston had proposed with a ring he'd purchased by maxing out his last available credit card, a fact Garrett's investigation had uncovered within hours of the Instagram announcement. The ring was supposed to be 3 carats, VVS 1 clarity, D color, worth $35,000 according to Preston's carefully crafted story. Reality: 1.8 carats, SI2 clarity, I color, purchased from a discount broker in Midtown for $6,800. Victoria had posted photos from 6 angles, the diamond catching light and fooling everyone who didn't know how to grade stones properly. By November, Harrison Ashford had announced his intention to spin off the digital marketing division into a separate public company, Ashford Digital, with Victoria as CEO. The IPO was scheduled for June 6, 2024. Target valuation: $950 million. Victoria's ownership stake: 14%, worth approximately $130 million on paper. The media coverage had been immediate and fawning. Forbes ran a profile titled 30 Under 35, Victoria Ashford, Digital Marketing Wonderkind. TechCrunch predicted a blockbuster IPO. Business Insider called her the heir apparent who earned her throne. None of the articles mentioned her recent divorce from a man they'd never bothered to research. Garrett had compiled every article, every social media post, every public appearance into a file labeled Protocol Revelation, Target Narrative. She's building a personal brand around being self-made, despite having access to family money her entire life. The cognitive dissonance is remarkable. Nathaniel had studied the materials with clinical detachment. People believe what they want to believe. Victoria wants to believe she succeeded despite the mistake of marrying beneath her station. Her friends want to believe social climbing is virtuous. Preston wants to believe he's fooled everyone about his finances. Let them believe. Truth comes June 6th. The invitation had arrived in late May, forwarded to the email address Victoria still had for Nate Brooks. The message had been carefully crafted, every word dripping with condescension disguised as generosity. Nate, I know it's been a while, but I wanted to extend an invitation to Ashford Digital's IPO celebration. I thought you might like to attend and witness this milestone. After all, you knew me when I was starting my career. It would be meaningful to have you see how far I've come. No pressure if you're busy. I understand. Best, Victoria. Garrett had read it aloud in the penthouse study, his voice flat with barely contained anger. She wants you to witness her triumph, wants you to see everything you missed out on by being insufficiently ambitious. This is psychological warfare disguised as olive branch. This is perfect, Nathaniel had corrected. She's handed me the opportunity I've been waiting 18 months to receive. The response had been deliberately brief. Victoria, congratulations. I'll be there. Nate. 4 words that gave nothing away, that suggested the humble IT worker would arrive in his Honda, sit quietly in the back, and leave with his inadequacy confirmed. The preparations had begun immediately. Tom Ford's flagship store on Fifth Avenue had provided the midnight navy tuxedo, custom-fitted across 3 appointments, every detail perfect, from the peak lapels to the working buttonholes on the sleeves. John Lobb had crafted the Oxfords by hand, a process that took 6 weeks and cost more than most people spent on cars. The Patek Philippe had been purchased 2 years earlier, though its value had appreciated substantially as waiting lists stretched into decades. Garrett had arranged the Rolls-Royce Phantom rental, the white glove chauffeur service, the security detail that would remain invisible but omnipresent. The intelligence file on the event had grown to 47 pages. Guest lists, seating arrangements, press coverage plans, a minute-by-minute schedule of Victoria's planned evening, from the opening champagne toast to her keynote speech about perseverance and self-made success. The irony of that last detail had not been lost on anyone involved in protocol revelation. Ruby had watched the preparations with the solemn intensity of a general observing troops prepare for battle. When you walk in there, Dad, everyone's going to know. Everything she said about you, everything her family believed, all of it gets proven wrong in front of 300 people. That's the idea, sweetheart. Will it make you feel better, getting revenge? The question had stopped him cold. He'd looked at his daughter, at her serious eyes and worried expression, and realized she was asking because she feared the answer. It's not revenge, Ruby. Revenge would be destroying her company or sabotaging her career. This is just truth. I'm going to walk into that ballroom as myself, for the first time in 7 years, and let Victoria see what she traded away. But after the truth comes out, after everyone knows, what then? Will you be happy? He hadn't had an answer. The night before the IPO celebration, Nathaniel had stood alone in the penthouse, staring out at Manhattan's glittering skyline, while Ruby slept and Garrett reviewed final logistics. The Tom Ford tuxedo hung in his closet. The watch waited in its case. The Rolls-Royce was reserved and ready. Protocol revelation was set to execute exactly as planned. But Ruby's question echoed in the silence. Would this make him happy? Or would it simply prove that he could wound as efficiently as he'd been wounded? That he could humiliate as thoroughly as he'd been humiliated? That wealth gave him the power to rewrite narratives, but not to heal the damage those narratives had caused? His phone had buzzed. Text from Victoria, sent to the Nate Brooks number at 11:47 p.m. Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. It'll be nice to show you that hard work and ambition pay off. I hope you found some success in your own life. You deserved better than we had together. The message was poison wrapped in kindness, condescension disguised as well wishes. He'd typed 3 responses and deleted each one before settling on silence. Let her wonder. let her assume he was too busy fixing someone's laptop to respond properly. Let her believe, for 14 more hours, that Nate Brooks was still the inadequate man she'd left behind. Tomorrow would shatter every assumption. Tomorrow, 300 people would learn that the biggest mistake of Victoria Ashford's life hadn't been marrying beneath her station. It had been failing to look beneath the surface. Now, in the ballroom chaos of the present moment, Vivian Ashford pushed through the crowd with the determination of someone who'd built a career on manipulation and refused to believe it could fail her.
This is absurd. You hid that you were wealthy. That's manipulation. That's...
Nathaniel cut her off with surgical precision. I never lied about anything, Mrs. Ashford. I said I worked in technology. I do. I run a $7 billion investment firm. I said I lived modestly. I chose to. I never claimed poverty. Everyone assumed based on appearances. You, specifically, told Victoria I was dead weight, who would ruin her prospects. I believe those were your exact words, during a phone conversation she took in my presence. Vivian's face went from righteous anger to pale recognition. You heard that? Every word. You told her that men were investments, that she should cut her losses and find someone with real earning potential, that settling for love was romantic nonsense that poor people told themselves to justify mediocrity. The quotes were perfect, verbatim, impossible to deny. Victoria's eyes widened in horror, confirming what Nathaniel already knew. She remembered that conversation too, had internalized every toxic word. I was trying to help her. You were dragging her down. I was testing her. My first wife married me for money, then tried to leave me for someone wealthier. She died en route to her lover, leaving our daughter without a mother. I needed to know if Victoria could love me without financial incentive. The crowd had pressed closer, phones held high, recording every word for posterity and social media virality. Your daughter failed that test, spectacularly. She chose Preston's fake success over my real character. She chose the appearance of wealth over the substance of partnership. And you, Mrs. Ashford, were her teacher in that curriculum. Vivian opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words emerged. For perhaps the first time in her 60 years, she'd been rendered speechless. Preston tried to recover the situation, stepping forward with manufactured confidence. Okay, so you're rich. Congratulations. But you played games with Victoria's emotions. You manipulated her, tested her like she was some kind of experiment. That's not love. That's psychological abuse. Nathaniel's smile was glacial. Mr. Carmichael, you pursued a married woman under the guise of professional mentorship. You encouraged her to divorce me so you could position yourself as the superior alternative. You've bought her gifts you can't afford to maintain an illusion of wealth. You proposed with a ring you claimed was worth $35,000 when you actually paid $6,800 to a discount broker. Preston's face drained of color. How do you... I know everything, Preston. Your salary, your debts, your maxed credit cards, the second mortgage you took on the penthouse you purchased beyond your means, the car leases bleeding you $4,500 monthly, the personal loan from your brother that you've defaulted on twice. You're living paycheck to paycheck while pretending to be wealthy, and you've convinced Victoria that you're the successful one. The words landed like artillery shells, each one detonating Preston's carefully constructed facade. At least I'm honest about... You're honest about nothing. That Patek Philippe on your wrist? Replica. Cost you $2,000 from a dealer in Chinatown who specializes in convincing fakes. Your Brioni suit? Rental. Your penthouse? You're 3 payments behind on the mortgage. Your managing director title? You were promoted without a salary increase because Goldman knows you're desperate enough to accept prestige over compensation. Someone in the crowd gasped. Phones captured Preston's face as it went from red to white to a mottled purple.
You can't! This is slander!
It's documentation. I can provide receipts if you'd like. Bank statements, credit reports, text messages between you and your brother begging for another loan. Your entire financial life is an open book to someone with the resources to look. Preston turned to Victoria, desperation replacing confidence.
Babe, you know I love you.
The money doesn't matter. We have each other. But Victoria was staring at the replica Patek on Preston's wrist, her face cycling through emotions too fast to catalogue. Betrayal, humiliation, dawning realization that she'd traded one version of Nathaniel for an inferior copy, that Preston had been running the same con she'd accused Nathaniel of, except Preston was actually broke while pretending to be rich. The ballroom had descended into chaos. 300 conversations happening simultaneously, phones everywhere, social media exploding in real time as the story spread beyond the walls of the hotel. Nathaniel checked his own phone briefly. Twitter was trending. Instagram stories were proliferating. TechCrunch had already posted a breaking news alert. Hidden billionaire crashes ex-wife's IPO party. Nathaniel Blackwood reveals he worked as IT support to test wife's love. She failed. The article had been live for 6 minutes and already had 42,000 shares. Harrison Ashford attempted damage control, his CEO instincts overriding parental concern. Perhaps we should all take a moment to process this privately. Nathaniel, I'm sure we can discuss this like civilized adults. There's nothing to discuss, Mr. Ashford. I came because Victoria invited me. She wanted me to witness how far she'd climbed. I'm simply existing in the same space as my authentic self. If that creates discomfort, that's a consequence of her assumptions, not my deception. He turned to Victoria one final time. His voice dropping to a register meant only for her, though the room had gone so quiet that everyone strained to hear. You'll never know now, Victoria. Never know if you loved me or my potential worth. That uncertainty will You made your choice. Live with it. The walk to the Rolls-Royce felt like a victory march and a funeral procession combined. Behind him, he could hear the ballroom erupting into noise. Victoria's carefully planned triumph dissolving into the most spectacular public humiliation of her life. As the Phantom pulled away from the hotel, Nathaniel caught one last glimpse through the rear window. Victoria stood in the entrance, Preston beside her, her family gathered around in a tableau of confusion and damage control. She looked small, defeated, destroyed. He waited for the satisfaction to arrive. It didn't come. The Rolls-Royce glided through Boston's night streets in silence. Nathaniel stared at his reflection in the tinted window, watching the city blur past, and felt nothing resembling victory. Garrett's voice came quiet from the front seat. Twitter's exploding. Hashtag hidden billionaire trending #1. TechCrunch, Forbes, Bloomberg, they've all covered it. Victoria's trending too, but not the way she wanted. The tablet screen glowed between them, headlines cascading past. Forbes. The $4 billion question. Why Nathaniel Blackwood hid his fortune. Business Insider. Victoria Ashford's IPO triumph becomes cautionary tale. TechCrunch. Billionaire's 7-year test. Wife fails. Internet reacts. Thousands of comments. Strangers dissecting 7 years of his life. Victoria's choices. The morality of testing love against wealth. Garrett studied Nathaniel's face in the rearview mirror. "You don't look satisfied, boss." "I'm not. I'm empty." The penthouse was dark when they arrived. Ruby at a sleepover she'd strategically scheduled. A note on the counter confirmed she'd anticipated he might need solitude. "Dad, hope it went how you needed. See you tomorrow. Love you. R." Nathaniel poured expensive whiskey into Crystal, stood at the window watching helicopters trace paths across the skyline, and felt the weight of Ruby's unasked question pressing against his chest. "Will this make you happy?" His phone buzzed. A text from Victoria's number, sent at 11:53 p.m. "Nathaniel, I know you won't respond. I know I have no right, but please, can we talk? I need to understand. I need to explain. Please. Victoria." He read it twice before setting the phone face down, the whiskey burning his throat. Vindication, tasting like ash. Ruby had been right. Proving you've been wronged doesn't heal the wound. It just makes the scar visible to everyone else. Victoria's collapse began the moment Nathaniel's Rolls-Royce disappeared into Boston traffic. She'd stood in the hotel entrance, champagne and mascara mixing on her silk gown, while 300 guests streamed past, with phones still recording, still posting, still feeding the machine that was already rewriting her story, from triumph to cautionary tale. Preston had tried to salvage something, his voice pitched with desperation. "Babe, this doesn't change us."
So what if he's rich? We have real love.
But Victoria had been staring at his wrist, at the Patek Philippe she'd believed was authentic, that she'd photographed for Instagram, that she'd shown to friends as proof of Preston's success. "How much did you really pay for my engagement ring?" His face had confirmed the truth before words could attempt deception. $6,800. But the diamond is real, just... She'd pulled the ring off with enough force to scratch skin, thrown it at his chest where it bounced off rented Brioni fabric. "Get away from me. You're exactly what Nathaniel said. A fraud." Preston had left without dignity, pursued by cameras that would turn his retreat into viral content within the hour. The ballroom had emptied gradually, guests departing with glances that mixed pity and schadenfreude in equal measure. By midnight, only Victoria remained with her parents and Vivian, the four of them sitting in a service hallway where the press couldn't reach. Harrison had been on his phone for an hour, talking to crisis management consultants who charged $5,000 per hour to explain that the internet never forgets, and Victoria's reputation might never fully recover. Constance had sat in silence, occasionally dabbing at eyes with a handkerchief that cost more than most people's weekly salary. Vivian had been the first to speak, her voice carrying a weight Victoria had never heard before. "I ruined you. Everything I taught you about men and worth and status, I was wrong. I was bitter from 3 failed marriages, and I poisoned you with my cynicism." Victoria's throat felt raw. "You told me Nathaniel was holding me back." "I told you what I believed. But I was measuring worth by bank accounts instead of character. I taught you to do the same." "And now you've lost the only man who ever loved you for who you actually are, instead of what you represent." The admission should have felt validating. Instead, it just made the hollowness expand. Vivian had stood slowly, aged beyond her 60 years. "I'm sorry, Victoria. For what it's worth, I'm sorry." She'd left them there, Victoria, Harrison, Constance, surrounded by the debris of a celebration that had become a funeral. Monday morning arrived with financial consequences. Ashford Digital had priced at $38 per share Friday, anticipating strong opening trades. The scandal changed everything. The stock opened at $31, down 18%. By noon, it had fallen to $29, Close of trading? $28. A 26% collapse from the offering price. Victoria's 14% stake, worth $133 million on paper Friday, was now worth $98 million. She'd lost $35 million of theoretical wealth in 6 hours. The financial press showed no mercy. Wall Street Journal. Ashford Digital stumbles as CEO's personal drama dominates headlines. Bloomberg. When personal life tanks your stock. MarketWatch. Investors flee Ashford Digital amid scandal. Victoria sat in her corner office overlooking Boston Harbor, watching her net worth evaporate in real time, understanding that Nathaniel's revenge had been perfectly calibrated. He hadn't destroyed her company, hadn't sabotaged her career. He'd simply existed as himself, in a space where she'd invited him. The consequences were entirely her creation. Preston's collapse accelerated through the week. Goldman Sachs, discovering their managing director was maxed out on 7 credit cards and 3 payments behind on his mortgage, had suggested immediate resignation. Preston had complied Wednesday. By Friday, his penthouse was listed for sale. By the following Monday, bankruptcy papers had been filed. Victoria watched his destruction with numb detachment, seeing herself reflected in his desperation. They'd both been frauds. Preston pretending to be wealthy, Victoria pretending that character mattered less than status. Nathaniel had exposed them both with surgical precision. Summer passed in a haze of therapy sessions and avoidance. Victoria hired Dr. Patricia Whitmore in late June, began seeing her twice weekly by July. The sessions followed a pattern. Victoria attempting to explain what had happened, Dr. Whitmore gently redirecting her to examine why it had happened. You've been CEO for 3 months. The stock has recovered to $32. You're doing well professionally. Why does Nathaniel still occupy so much mental space? August heat made Manhattan oppressive, but Victoria barely noticed. She worked 80-hour weeks, threw herself into quarterly earnings calls and strategic planning, used exhaustion as anesthesia against the constant replay of that ballroom moment. Instagram remained dormant. She'd stopped posting the day after the IPO, let her follower count drift downward, reclaimed privacy she'd traded for validation. Lindsay and Sutton had drifted away by September, their texts growing sparse and then stopping entirely. Fair-weather friends revealed by storms. Dating was impossible. Every man she met came preloaded with knowledge of her most public failure, wondering if she wanted him or his tax return. If she'd learned anything or remained the woman who'd divorced a billionaire for being insufficiently ambitious. Preston had vanished, social media deleted, forwarding address unknown. Rumor suggested Phoenix and a sales job, starting over at 39 with nothing but debt and humiliation. Victoria almost envied the anonymity. Vivian's stroke came in early October. Mild, but meaningful. She'd called Victoria from the hospital with an apology that arrived too late, but felt genuine. I taught you that love was transactional because that's what I believed after 3 divorces. I was wrong, Victoria. And I'm sorry I made you wrong, too. The apology didn't undo damage, but it closed a circle neither woman had known was open. Vivian had been released after 4 days, moved to a rehabilitation facility in Connecticut, began the slow work of relearning how to use her right hand. Victoria visited every Sunday through October, sat beside her aunt's bed, and listened to confessions of regret that might have changed everything if they'd come 7 years earlier. I was so focused on not being poor again that I forgot why being poor was hard, Vivian had whispered one Sunday, her speech still slightly slurred. It wasn't the lack of money. It was people treating you like you didn't matter because you didn't have enough of it. And then I became one of those people. Made you into one too. Victoria had held her aunt's functioning hand, feeling the weight of choices that cascaded across generations. "I don't know how to fix what I've broken, Aunt Viv." "You can't fix it, darling. You can only learn from it and do better next time. If there is a next time." Nathaniel's summer had passed in a blur of board meetings and acquisition closings that should have felt triumphant, but registered as merely transactional. Blackwood Capital completed 4 major deals between June and September. Portfolio companies expanded, revenue climbed. His personal wealth crossed $5 billion by August. None of it filled the void. Ruby had noticed first, commenting over breakfast in early July. "You proved you were right, Dad. Victoria made a mistake. Everyone knows. But you're not happy." "I'm fine, sweetheart." "You're sad," she'd insisted with adolescent certainty. "You thought proving she was wrong would make you feel better. It didn't. Now you're stuck with being right and alone instead of being wrong and married." The observation had been too accurate to argue against. Sometimes being right doesn't feel like winning. Then maybe the game was designed wrong from the start. Ruby's wisdom at 13 exceeded what most people achieved in decades. Losing one parent and watching the other test love in ways that produced isolation instead of certainty had accelerated her understanding of human nature's complicated geometry. Garrett had been less gentle in his assessment during an August strategy meeting. "Boss, you've been to 3 board meetings this week and declined 2 gala invitations. You're avoiding people. That's not like you." "I'm focused on work." "You're hiding." Different thing entirely. Nathaniel had wanted to argue, but couldn't find the energy. Hiding was exactly what he was doing, not in a queen's apartment this time, but in the penthouse, behind work that no longer felt meaningful, avoiding social situations where his presence created whispers and where women approached with spreadsheet eyes. The hollow space inside him had grown throughout summer and into fall, fed by the realization that revenge was a meal that left you hungry, no matter how thoroughly you consumed it. The medical charity gala came in late November, one of the few events Nathaniel agreed to attend because Blackwood Capital had sponsored pediatric cardiac research to the tune of $10 million annually. He'd arrived expecting the usual pattern: whispers, phone cameras, women who knew his net worth before learning his name. Doctor. Evelyn Grace Sinclair had been standing near the bar in a simple black dress, studying the event program with focused intensity that suggested actual interest in cardiac research rather than social climbing. Nathaniel had approached because she was the only person in the room not looking at him. "The research presentation is in the Astor Room at 9. You seem like someone who'd actually attend." She'd glanced up, recognized him immediately, and returned to the program without visible reaction. "I plan to. Dr. Morrison's work on pediatric valve replacement is revolutionary. Lives saved per research dollar is remarkable." "You're a doctor?" "Cardiac surgeon. I spend 80-hour weeks cutting open children's chests and repairing hearts that didn't form correctly. This gala funds work that might someday make my job obsolete. I consider that aspirational." The response had been so refreshingly unconcerned with his net worth that Nathaniel had laughed genuinely for the first time in months. "You know who I am. Nathaniel Blackwood, the hidden billionaire story that went viral in June. I saw the headlines, scrolled past because celebrity drama isn't my concern. Children dying from congenital heart defects is. I'm not a celebrity. You orchestrated a very public revelation of your ex-wife's mistakes." "That makes you at least celebrity adjacent, which means I'm not interested in whatever this conversation is supposed to be." She'd started to walk away before Nathaniel surprised himself by stopping her. "Wait, please. Can we start over? Not as billionaire and cardiac surgeon, just as 2 people who care about the same research." Evelyn had paused, studied him with eyes that had seen too much death to be impressed by money.
Why would I want to do that?
Because I haven't had a genuine conversation with someone who didn't want something from me in 7 years. And your indifference is the most attractive thing I've encountered since my daughter was born. The honesty had apparently registered. She'd returned to where he stood, extended her hand formally. Dr. Evelyn Sinclair. I save approximately 43 children per year from death by cardiac failure.
I work 90 hours weekly and sleep 4 hours nightly.
I own one car that's 12 years old, and I've never owned designer anything because wasteful spending bothers me when children die from lack of funding. If those facts make me incompatible with billionaire social circles, this conversation can end now. Nathaniel had shaken her hand, feeling something shift in his chest that had been frozen since Victoria's betrayal. Nathaniel Blackwood. I built a company worth $7 billion and used the wealth to fund research like tonight's because my daughter lost her mother, and I wanted to prevent other children from experiencing that loss. I drive a 2007 Honda because it was my father's. I've never cared about designer anything. If those facts make me compatible with your worldview, I'd like to continue this conversation. They'd talked through the research presentation, through dinner, through the auction where Nathaniel had bid $200,000 on a medical residency program Evelyn cared about. At evening's end, standing in the lobby while car services were summoned, Evelyn had offered something that looked almost like a smile. You're different than the headlines suggested. The headlines were accurate. I did test my wife. I did orchestrate her humiliation. Those facts are true and uncomfortable, but not complete. No, not complete. I was wounded by my first wife's betrayal and paranoid about repetition. I handled it poorly. The test was cruel, even if the results were revealing. Evelyn had nodded slowly, processing. Self-awareness is rarer than wealth. I appreciate the honesty.
Would you have dinner with me?
Somewhere quiet, where we can talk about pediatric cardiac research, or anything else you care about that has nothing to do with my bank account. I work 80-hour weeks, Mr. Blackwood. Nathaniel. I'm uncompromising about my schedule. If you're looking for someone to accompany you to galas and smile for cameras, I'm categorically wrong. I'm looking for someone who sees me instead of my portfolio. Everything else is negotiable. She'd given him her number. Had texted 3 days later, suggesting coffee at a hospital cafeteria between surgeries. Had shown up in scrubs, still flecked with blood from an emergency valve repair on a 6-year-old. They'd talked for 40 minutes about success and failure and the difference between wealth and worth. When Evelyn had returned to surgery, Nathaniel had sat in that fluorescent-lit cafeteria and felt something resembling hope for the first time since the divorce. December arrived, with Victoria's transformation continuing in small, painful increments. The therapy sessions had evolved from trauma processing to actual growth work. Dr. Whitmore had pushed her toward uncomfortable questions about identity and worth that Victoria had spent 32 years avoiding. Who are you without the CEO title? Without the Ashford name? Without external validation? Victoria had stared at the abstract art on the office wall, unable to answer. I don't know. That's what terrifies me. What if there's nothing underneath? Then you get to choose who to become. That's not emptiness. That's possibility. The work was harder than anything Victoria had done professionally. Building a company required skills and strategy. Building a self required confronting the fact that she'd been performing a role, rather than living authentically. She'd started volunteering in early December, teaching free business workshops at a community college in Queens. The students were working class, first-generation immigrants, people who reminded her of who she'd been before the Ashford money had given her the option to forget. One student, a 30-year-old single mother named Keisha, had asked the question that broke something open. "Ms. Ashford, do you need an Ivy League degree to succeed in business?" Victoria had felt the weight of every assumption she'd made about Nathaniel, about credentials versus character, about pedigree versus performance. "No. You need honesty, hard work, and the wisdom to never forget where you came from." "I forgot. Don't make my mistake." The answer had felt more honest than anything she'd said in a corporate boardroom. After class, Victoria had driven to her father's grave for the first time in 3 years. Robert Warner, who'd lost his factory job in 2006 and spent his final years delivering pizzas to make rent, who died believing he'd failed his family. She'd knelt in December cold, touching the headstone. "I'm sorry, Dad. I was ashamed of you, ashamed of us. I thought being poor was the worst thing that could happen. I was wrong. Being cruel is worse. Being blind is worse." The bookshelf Nathaniel had built still occupied pride of place in her Brooklyn studio apartment. She ran her fingers over the carved letters every night. Olivia and James. Always. And the hidden message she'd discovered months after receiving it. JLY. James loves you. She'd cried the night she'd found that inscription, overwhelmed by the sweetness of his secret message. She cried now for different reasons. Not self-pity, but genuine grief for what she'd destroyed. In therapy on December 15th, Dr. Whitmore had given her homework. Write Nathaniel a letter, not to send, to articulate for yourself what you've learned. Victoria had spent a week on the letter, drafting and redrafting, until every sentence felt honest instead of performative. The final version filled 2 pages, handwritten, ink smudged in places where tears had fallen. One paragraph read, "You wanted to know if I could love you without knowing your worth. I couldn't. But the tragedy isn't that I failed your test. It's that I didn't even realize I was being tested. Because I'd already decided you weren't worth the effort of truly seeing." She'd folded the letter into her journal, a private accounting that might never be read, but needed to be written. Christmas morning arrived, with Ruby presenting Nathaniel a gift wrapped in newspaper comics. Inside was a framed photograph from the November gala, Nathaniel and Evelyn mid-conversation, both laughing, both unaware of the camera. "She's different from Ms. Victoria," Ruby observed. "Very different. She asked what you love instead of what you own. That's what you said you were looking for." Nathaniel set the frame on the mantel where morning light caught it. "She did. Every conversation she's more interested in ideas than acquisitions." "Do you love her?" The question should have been premature. They'd been dating 6 weeks, had kept it deliberately quiet, had built something slowly. "I might. It's early, but I might." "Good," Ruby declared with 13-year-old certainty. "Because she's the first person you've dated who looks at you the way you used to look at Ms. Victoria, before everything went wrong. Like you're more than your net worth." The observation carried wisdom beyond her years, earned through loss and witness. That afternoon, Evelyn joined them for Christmas dinner. Simple food Nathaniel cooked himself, while Ruby explained quantum mechanics and Evelyn asked questions that suggested genuine interest. Watching his daughter and this woman who'd stumbled into his life through complete indifference to his wealth, Nathaniel felt the hollow space inside him beginning to fill with something that looked like actual happiness. Evelyn helped clear dishes, declined the penthouse's perfection in favor of the moment's authenticity. Left at 8 because she had early surgery and sleep was already a luxury she couldn't afford. At the door, she'd paused. "Your daughter is remarkable. You've done well with her, despite everything." "She's survived despite me, not because of me." "No,
She's thrived because you loved her more than you loved revenge. That's harder than people think.
After she left, Ruby had looked at her father with satisfaction and relief mixed in equal measure.
She's the one, Dad. The real one. Not a test, not a performance. Just someone who sees you.
Nathaniel pulled his daughter into a hug. You're very wise for 13.
I read a lot,
She'd replied, muffled against his chest.
and I learned from watching you that testing people is stupid. Just be yourself and see who stays.
The advice from a teenager who'd lost one parent and survived another's emotional distance carried the authority of hard-won experience. I love you, Ruby.
Love you too, Dad.
Now, can we watch the movie? Evelyn said she'd text during surgery breaks and you keep checking your phone like a teenager. He had been checking. Was checking even now when the text arrived at 9:47. Valve replacement successful. 6-year-old girl goes home to her family next week. Merry Christmas, Nathaniel. Thank you for funding the research that made tonight possible. He'd donated $400 million to pediatric cardiac research over 5 years. Amounts that had felt abstract until this text made them concrete. A 6-year-old girl whose heart had been repaired with techniques his money had helped develop. Victoria had wanted to measure his worth by salary and social standing. Evelyn measured it by lives saved and children who'd grow old enough to have children of their own.